Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. I am one of the hosts, Zach, and the other host is Chris. What's going on, buddy?
Hello, Zach. Hello, everyone around the world in the interwebs and in North America, where we are today, Sunday in North America, afternoon time. I'm doing great, Zach. Awesome to see you. Hopefully, everything's been well. I know you're busy, but hopefully, you've had a good week. I've been busy, been traveling too, and it's lovely to be here and talking about our next pilot. This is going to be great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to believe it's March too. I mean, March
I
2,
know.
as in it's also March, not March 2, but it is March 2nd at the time of the
Mhm.
recording. Yes, it's wild. It was a busy week this week with work and everything, and weekend has been a little bit busy, but not too bad. But yeah, it's good to be back as always, chatting about what we love. And we are continuing our spotlight series here on the Random Redshirt podcast, talking about the different Star Trek pilots. And we are on to the third to last pilot called Star Trek Prodigy. Next up will be Strange New Worlds, and then Star Trek Picard, which that will be interesting to go back and rewatch the very first episode of Picard. And same thing with Strange New Worlds, actually, because we discussed Strange New World season one and Picard season one and two, but never did a deep dive into that first episode.
Yeah, you're right. It'll be pretty neat to go into both Picard and Strange New Worlds and take a look at it. It's been a while since either of us has seen it, and so
Yeah.
I'm still just trying to recall even what happened in that uh first episode of Picard. Oh, that's gonna be fun. Definitely gonna
Yeah.
be fun. Big fun.
It's, uh, I think I've only seen it once too. I don't think I've watched
Mm,
through Picard more than
yeah,
one time.
yeah.
I mean, I've seen little clips on like YouTube from Picard, but I've never gone back and rewatched the show from beginning to end or just season three or anything like that.
Yeah. Now you got motivated, inspired to watch more of Lower Decks after we watched the pilots, right? So you got to see even more of Lower Decks, which I think is really cool, super
Yep.
cool.
I
Yeah.
am done with season one of Lower
Oh,
Decks.
nice.
I am into
Nice.
season two, and I'm enjoying it. I mean, it's not my favorite Star Trek series,
Hmm.
but I am definitely enjoying it. There's some funny moments, some definite Easter eggs for sure that people have talked about how the Lower Decks is just scattered with Easter eggs. So there's definitely that. Some of the humor I don't find super funny, some of it I do, but it's all based on individual preference and taste, right? I mean, it'd be the
Yeah.
same. You and I could watch the exact same episode of Lower Decks and both laugh at different things. Although that probably would happen. My guess is based on our likes and our tastes, we would probably laugh at a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we would. We
Yeah.
would for sure. It is interesting when you think about Lower Decks and you think about like Prodigy that we'll talk about today. Uh, it's the franchise of Star Trek and of Paramount, like trying to get into these different demographics, right?
Yeah.
For viewerships of Star Trek, and all sorts of like demographics and the youth demographics, which is Prodigy, trying to get them interested in Star Trek like earlier. So
Yeah.
that's pretty cool.
You're 100% right on that. And this definitely I think appeals or is geared toward a different audience than Lower Decks because Lower Decks is more of like that kind of um what's the like American Dad, Family Guy, Robot Chicken, even though that's like stop
Yeah.
claymation, but it's that adult humor cartoon stuff, right? That not everybody is a big fan of necessarily, but I know it's a very popular show. I will say, like Lower Decks, this series is also animated. Like Lower Decks, I found, I don't know, and we'll get through into this as we go through the episode or the two-part episode here. I found there were also a number of Easter eggs in this two-part pilot. Maybe not as much as Lower Decks, but it certainly had a fair number of its own Easter eggs.
Hmm. I want to hear, yeah, I definitely want to hear the Easter eggs. I probably didn't catch as many Easter eggs like as you heard or as you saw, so I definitely want to hear about the Easter eggs that you saw like as you went through it. I think that's really cool. Oh,
Yeah.
that is cool.
Yeah, so we're excited to be here and talk about Star Trek Prodigy Lost and Found Part 1 and 2, the pilot of the series, which came out back in 2021, I believe, is when it premiered.
Mm.
I have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure it's 2021. Uh, Strange New Worlds came out in 2022.
Mm.
So we'll go back and look at that. But if this is your first time, welcome to the Random Redshirt podcast. We're a couple of nerdy guys, so I talk about all things nerdy, Star Trek to Star Wars, everything in between. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, your favorite podcast platform, and all that fun jazz and stuff we don't even know about probably. Um, but yeah, welcome. And this is our look at Star Trek Prodigy Lost and Found Part 1 and 2. Obviously, we are several years late to the party of talking about Prodigy, but that's okay because we're doing this as part of our current Spotlight series, which is focused on the Star Trek pilots. And as we had mentioned in the last episode where we talked about Lower Decks, we're also going to be doing a new Spotlight series coming up after we do Picard, which is going to be all about Section 31, which will culminate, Chris, in the Section 31 movie.
Yes, it will. That will be very, very cool. And I know you and I are both very curious how we will each receive the Section 31 movie after we have a chance to talk about the Section 31 episodes and kind of come to understanding of what we would feel like, what we would want in a Section 31 movie. So
Yeah.
looking forward to that.
Yeah, because I think you and I have certain, because we haven't seen it,
Hmm.
obviously, right? So I think you and I have very certain I don't know that make any sense. We have certain expectations of what we are thinking should be in a Section 31 movie. Now, what I'm trying to do personally, Chris, is I'm trying to do like the solo movie. I'm trying not to allow the outside influence of all the critiques and the feedback and the scores online of this movie to affect my judgment going into it. I want to go into it as fresh as I can, kind of like with the solo movie when they made that Star Wars movie. I'd heard nothing but absolutely horrific things about that movie. I watched it. I was like, hey, this is pretty good. So I'm trying to do that with Section 31. I have heard nothing but absolutely terrible things about it. We have other friends who have podcasts who have said they couldn't even get through it. So we'll see. But I'm trying to go into it with a fresh perspective into this movie.
Indeed, indeed, we shall see. One of the things I'm really happy about this current Spotlight series is that I would not, I highly doubt I would have watched Prodigy unless we did this Spotlight series. So this forced me to watch Prodigy, which I'm glad that I did. Kind of exposure to all of the different Star Trek series. See me
I'd
pause
pause for a
there.
second.
I paused there. I had to make sure that I was saying the correct thing.
Yeah.
So that's good. It's good that we're doing this so we can diversify what we're watching.
Yeah, it was a great idea on your part to do this pilot series. What I've loved, and we've talked about this on the phone before, is I've loved how we have been able to look at each series, how it started, the themes, the intro credits theme song, all the way to the end. Other than I guess Lower Decks and Prodigy, you and I have watched all the other series from beginning to end. So it's cool to be able to look back and say, okay, hindsight's 2020 because we know everything that happens in the series and we're going back and rewatching the pilot maybe for the first time in a while. How does that stack up against the other series? How does it stack up against the series as a whole? Were there any big significant changes from the pilot to the second episode, which there usually are some decent sized changes? And it's been fun to be able to see that and then compare and contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. It has been a great time to be able to compare and contrast on that. Fun,
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely. So we're going to dive into Star Trek Prodigy Lost and Found Part 1 and 2 of Star Trek Prodigy. And this is, of course, a series geared towards a much younger audience compared to the last Star Trek series we talked about, which was Lower Decks.
And thank you for like sharing. I had no idea that this was not on Amazon Prime. So
Paramount
we've
Plus.
Paramount Plus.
Oh, yeah. The first season
Yeah.
was, and then I guess it didn't, was not going to get picked up or whatever. And then I guess Netflix came in and picked it up for season two. So it all migrated over to Netflix, I guess, is how I think that's how it went down.
How interesting. Okay, so that's why it was on Netflix.
Yeah, it
Okay.
originally I'm 99% sure it originally started on Paramount Plus and then it
Mm,
moved to Netflix once Netflix got the ability to do it.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That was good. Because I would have, without you like sharing with me where to find it, I would have been looking for a while. Like, oh, where do I find this? So,
Well, I will say it's not because I remembered it was on Netflix. It's because I went to Paramount Plus first and looked for it. And I was like, where the frick is this? And then I looked it up. I was like, oh, that's right. It's on Netflix. So that's why I was like, I better tell Chris in case he does the same thing I do. Save you
Yeah,
like 30 or 40 seconds of your life you can't get back.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, so I thought like visually and the animation was beautiful. I thought
Yeah.
it just looked really looks first class. And so the production values looked great. And um, we open looks like we open the series. We open this particular episode on a prison colony planet called Tars Lamora. I believe
Hmm.
that the planet that's called, and just a whole bunch of prisoners on this planet, and we get introduced to the main character, Dal, who is looking for a way to escape. And I'm not sure. I don't think we ever really learn like too much on his backstory or what kind of species he is. I think that's all like intentional, that it's kind of a mystery for right now, like where he comes from, or even why he's on that prison planet to begin with.
Right.
I'm thinking through the episode and I don't recall like any backstory on why he ended up there to
Same.
begin with.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. Visually stunning. Now, obviously, there is massive differences, but when it opens up, and I had seen, I don't think I finished part one
Mhm.
of this pilot. I got when it first came out. I think I started watching it, and I just kind of was like, I'm not really feeling it, so I turned it off. And now obviously
Oh,
I'm coming
yeah.
coming back to it for the podcast, which I'm glad we did to be able to actually watch the pilot in its entirety, both parts. And when it opens up on a prison colony, my immediate thought was Rurapente from Star
Oh,
Trek
yeah.
Six,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know if you ever had any of the thoughts about Rurapente throughout the two parts of this episode, but I initially thought that I'm thinking, okay, prisoners, they're drilling or doing some kind of hard manual labor, and I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe there's, because we don't know exactly where this is located, right?
Right.
At least in the very beginning, like as you're discussing the opening of this episode. So I'm thinking, oh, well, where is this place? Uh, could it be something like Rurapente? Who's running the prison colony? Who's there? What are they doing? All those kinds of things are floating through my head as the episode gets rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, it is interesting. I like not knowing where um it is. So I think since then you and I have kind of learned like, hey, this is in the Delta Quadrant, but actually I like not knowing where it is because it kind of puts some like mystery like in there. I assumed it was in the Delta Quadrant because we get a little bit of a Kazon character that comes
Yeah.
in near the beginning of the episode, and he's bringing a small cat being a
Yeah.
Keton, so
Yeah.
to them. And there's a what we learned, there's a kind of a daughter father that's on the prison planet, and the daughter is oh, her name is just gonna escape me. Gotta go search
Yeah,
here.
her name is Gwen, right?
Gwen, yes, Gwen. Yeah.
Yeah. And she's apparently a fierce negotiator because she negotiated with that Kazon. And then I guess told Dreadnought, which is like the General Grievous looking robot thing by her, he says something or whatever, and he's like, what did that Kazon say, whatever? And she says, I told him if he brings back a young one like this again, then he's gonna be turned into a prisoner or something like that. Right? So she's
Yeah.
very fierce. You learn very quickly she's
Yeah.
a very strong, very fierce, negotiating, strong-willed type of character that's got a significant role here on this prison colony.
Yeah. Now you touch on the android, uh Dreadnought, right? I think that's his name.
Yeah.
And I think this is important because you and I, at at almost the very beginning of this episode, were feeling the exact same thing. You mentioned General Grievous, and yes, I thought immediately when I saw him, oh, it's General Grievous. And we both felt like when we watched this felt like Clone Wars.
Yes, like I was going to say this for the end, but I'll just say this
Yeah,
now so it kind of sets the tone here going forward. This whole two-part episode, and maybe it'll change as the show goes on. But this whole two-part episode felt very much like Star Wars Clone Wars. It
yeah,
didn't have much of a Star Trek feel to it at all, honestly. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, because this is its own show. It's unique, right? And if you remember when we talked about Lower Decks in the past, the last episode we did, um, we discussed kind of timeline stuff, right? And this on the timeline, I believe, takes place approximately about 3 years in the future from the beginning of Lower Decks. Lower Decks was like
Okay.
2380, and I want to say this was like 2383 or something. So that's okay. It's in the future. It's different. It's got a different vibe and a feel. I'm not one of those people where it's like Star Trek has to look and feel this exact way, otherwise it's not Star Trek. I do think there are certain what I would call like markers that you would look for to consider something part of the franchise. This very much felt like an animated Clone Wars episode.
Yeah. And they're going for a completely different demographic, right? So
Yes.
there's a lot of action like in these both these episodes, these pilot episodes, this two-parter. I mean, Dahl is trying to escape the prison colony, so they have this whole built-up action sequence um where he takes this loader vehicle and is trying to get out, but he can't. Um, and then they have some very extended action sequences in the second part, where where they're trying to get the escape the planet again. They're able to find the Federation ship, get on it, kind of jumpstart it, which we'll talk about later. But a lot of action in there too. One at near the beginning of this episode, one of the things that I like um, is that you see this being, Dahl sees this being that we later learn is like Zero or Prisoner Zero. I
Yeah.
think I'm getting that right, but it's
Yeah.
Zero. Yeah.
Yep. Real quick, sorry.
Yeah.
Did that remind you of Doctor Who at all? With the
Yes.
it, is
Yes.
it isn't it called Prisoner Zero?
Yes. Yeah.
That's the first Matt Smith episode, isn't it? The
Hmm.
very first episode, he is the
Yeah.
doctor. He comes in and it's is it Prisoner Zero, Agent Zero, or something like that
Yeah.
that they're after.
Do you think that was, I have no, I know we have no idea, but it just seems too much of a coincidence. Like that was maybe directly, maybe an homage or like a credit to Doctor Who. Yeah. Who knows, right?
I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe it's just a coincidence, but for nerds like us who are part of a fandom of different franchises, it certainly
Hmm.
would make sense to connect those dots.
Yeah. So I was totally thinking about the same thing. I I do really like that Zero is a Medusan
Yeah.
species because I don't recall that they brought back any Medusan species since the original series. Do you recall? Like,
I don't think so. No, I
okay.
can't think. I mean, there's been other species and creatures that are kind of similar esque, right? They're these
Hmm.
energy type of creatures. In fact, I think TNG's got one where there's this thing that moves in and out of the ship out into space and zips back in and stuff. That's energy type, but I don't think it's that species. So you're right. I think this is the first time we've seen that since TOS. So we've got a couple of I don't want to call them, they're not really Easter eggs, right? But kind of throwbacks. So you got TOS homage, Voyager. Obviously, Voyager is linked in all throughout this show. But the
Yeah.
Voyager homage with the Kazon, we're kind of connecting the dots, saying this is probably in the Delta Quadrant because of the Kazon, and then this creature now that we haven't seen since TOS.
Yeah, that's right, since 2OS. So I could really see like if you are as a parent and you're watching this with a young child or an older child, that's
Yeah,
fine too. That'd be pretty parents would kind of dig that if they're familiar with the Medusans and going, "Oh, all right. The
yeah,
Medusans in this. That's pretty cool." So it's something for the older audience to really appreciate and get into as well.
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. S- So I I I like the character of Gwen. We're gonna learn more about her, but we come to understand that Gwen and Dahl like they know each other. We don't have at least that's how I felt. We don't have the
Yes,
backstory of like how they know each other yet, but that was pretty kind of cool to see throughout the episode, like what was happening between them.
you're right. They don't explain much about their relationship, at least in this two part pilot. The only thing that I can infer from what they're showing on screen is that Dahl has obviously been at the prison long enough. She's one of the, I don't want to call it the overseers of the prison. You know, she kind of helps run the place. And so because of that, Dahl clearly is one of those prisoners who's caused some trouble, gotten into some stuff, done some things. And so she's intimately aware of this character and what Dahl has done, and there's more to this backstory, obviously, that I'm sure that they go into as the show goes on. But it's very evident that they know each other, probably based on Dahl's time there.
That's right. We come to learn that the Dreadnought, if I'm saying his name
Yeah,
right. So Dreadnought and Gwen's father, the diviner, they all want Prisoner Zero, like for some reason. Um, and they feel that Dahl knows where Prisoner Zero is or can like lead them to Prisoner Zero, so they send Dahl to these mines to go kind of search out Prisoner Zero and give them
yeah.
a lead on catching that
And
prisoner. Yeah.
there was an episode that I'm just now remembering from Voyager. I believe the name of the episode's called Dreadnought. And if I don't know if you remember this, I've seen it a number of times. It's actually I
Oh,
like the episode. It's an episode where they capture this like rogue missile and it's got some type of
yeah.
intelligence and B'Elanna's trying or no, it's not a rogue missile, it's like a ship or something like that, right? And
It was a
B'Elanna had
missile, or if I'm,
something, right?
yeah,
Yeah, but B'Elanna had worked on it in the Alpha Quadrant and somehow it ends up in the Delta Quadrant and now she's trying to convince it to because I think it's a card is it a Cardassian ship or anyways, do you know what I'm talking about?
if it
I'm trying to remember the specifics of the episode.
if it's the one, if it's this one that I'm thinking you're talking about, the doctor finds this kind of ship, kind of missile thing on this planet, and it's got an AI to it. And the doctor says, "Hey, this AI is confused, and we need to make it better." They learn later, like that it is a missile,
Yeah,
um, and they're trying, and the missile has like this pre-programmed to go detonate on their enemy homeworld, and they're trying to convince the AI, not to do that because the war's over, and it takes over the doctor for a period of time, and
yep.
there's a lot of back and forth, and
That's
it's
right.
yeah.
You're absolutely right. So yeah, it encounters Dreadnought, which is similar, not exactly
Mm,
similar to the name, right? A
yeah.
Cardassian missile that B'Elanna Torres had originally reprogrammed as part of her time in the Maquis. And even though somehow I don't think they ever explain it, that maybe they do. It's been a long time
Mm,
since I've watched the episode, though. It's season two. And even though it was lost in the Delta Quadrant somehow, the missile still believes it's on its Maquis mission in the Alpha Quadrant. The problem is it now has a target that it's intercepting, which is an inhabited world in the Delta Quadrant, and they don't want it to kill
mm,
millions of lives.
yeah.
So that's where I kind of got that name. I don't know if that's intentional or if I'm just looking too far into that, but I just know that there's a lot of Voyager related stuff in this show.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense that there would be a lot of Voyager related stuff in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Um,
But we also learned too, Chris, that Gwen is also apparently a gifted translator because apparently she can translate in multiple languages. And Dreadnought is reminding her that even though she can speak all these languages, she's not allowed to speak on the behalf of her father, the diviner.
which was an interesting name,
Yeah.
I thought, right? And
Yeah.
we're trying to understand his motivations. We later learn like he's searching for the ship that's been buried like in there, and
Yep.
that's what he wants. So but we're still learning his backstory, still learning what it's all about with there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when eventually, so she's summoned to see the diviner, which is her dad, and he's in this like fluid chamber. So we don't know why either. That's like, and initially we don't see him. In fact, they don't actually reveal what he actually looks like until the very, very last moment of the episode. So then you're like, oh, okay, he's looks like the same species as his daughter. So this is why, as opposed to just being some alien that was captured there and he made her his daughter, it seems as though they're the same member of the same species.
Yeah, it does. And you said that was voiced by John Noble, I believe his name is. So I think that's
Yes,
what.
from a million things, but
Yeah.
we know him very well from Fringe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Love us some Fringe.
yeah. Fringe,
Definitely.
Fringe to me was like I don't know if you ever felt like this, but I remember when my wife and I would watch it back when it was on. I remember looking at her going, I know you haven't seen X-Files, but this reminds me of a modern day X-Files. I
Mhm.
know there's a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. And so I always thought X-Files a lot when I watch Fringe.
Me too. Really, really like it.
Yeah.
So part one of this two-parter, I think, ends with them discovering the Federation ship in the mine. I believe
Yeah, I
discovering
think
it
so.
and going. I don't remember if they actually activate the ship, but they discover it and are able to enter it. So
Yep.
I like that. I like that.
And we don't know either. We don't know how long Dahl's been on the prison colony, right? We
Yeah.
don't know how long any of them have been there. They're all kind of young. A lot of the characters are younger, right? Which would make sense if you're appealing to a young audience, a kid audience, to having kid type characters. Just
Mm-hmm.
like one thing I will say now, I have not we have not finished it yet, but we've watched I think almost half of the Star Wars Skeleton Crew show,
Mm-hmm.
and it's actually pretty good. It's like a Goonies meets Star Wars. It's pretty good, but it's geared towards kids, and almost all the pretty much all the main characters are kids, except for a couple of adults. So and it makes sense because they're appealing to a young audience. So in this case, they're appealing to a younger audience, especially younger than the lower decks. And so it makes sense for a majority of the characters to be of a younger nature.
Yeah. Yeah, that completely makes sense. Um, totally. Part two is all about them using the ship, wanting to use the ship to escape, and then being able to get out, figuring out how to start the ship, and then really uh, there's a lot of action in this, like we said before, but like this really long kind of multi-stage action chase sequence of them like flying the ship out and Dreadnought, getting on the ship and trying to stop the ship from getting away. Um, and we know that the diviner, this is his he really wants to capture the ship, so no matter what he wants the ship like intact for whatever reason.
Yeah, he doesn't want it damaged, right? Maybe
Yeah.
and that's the thing. So why does he want the ship? Is he himself also stuck there? Or is this some way to he
Well,
wants to get somewhere else and he doesn't have a ship like I guess that's kind of redundant, but why does he need the ship? I guess that's my question. And we learn towards the end of the first part of the pilot, that the ship and Dahl are located in the northwest crevasse, which I'm thinking, okay, because it's a crevasse, that means it's super, super deep in this mine.
mhm.
It's way down there. It's really hard to navigate and get to. And so that really sets up the stage and sets your mind for, okay, this is not an easy place to get to. Obviously, Dahl and another character that he ends up that you meet, Rock Talk, I think's how you say the name.
Yeah.
They fall into this by accident. This is not something they knew about, let alone knew where it was. So it really sets the stage moving forward for the rest of part one and into part two to give you an idea as to how hard it is to get wherever this ship has been buried.
Yeah. And apparently there's some valuable like mineral or crystal in there that they can get and they can mine and get out.
Yeah, exactly. And we also meet another character in part one that becomes a main character in part two, which is this engineer type named Jankum Pog, who is revealed to be a Tellarite. I don't think he looks much like a Tellarite. Maybe with a little bit of like the pig mouth kind of thing, but it doesn't really remind me of a Tellarite. And I would have never guessed Tellarite unless they actually said that he was a Tellarite.
I agree. I mean, I thought it was cool that they referenced the Tellarite and said, "Hey, he's a Tellarite," and they referenced that, hey, they're really kind of argumentative, and so they completely play that off with a few kind of comedic lines on trying to play with his argumentative nature. I thought he felt like a character out of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, just on
Yeah,
how he
like Bebop or
looked.
Rocksteady. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, totally.
yeah.
And then like, what's the Tellarite doing in the Delta Quadrant? We don't know.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
I guess you could make an argument that that could happen, right? I mean, in
yeah,
Voyager, we had Ferengi that appeared in the Delta
true.
Quadrant, and they explained that it was the Ferengi that went through the wormhole in TNG, right?
Hmm.
They were trying to negotiate the wormhole, and they ended up over there, and that's how they got there. I have no idea how the Tellarite would have gotten there, but I guess you could make an argument that yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And one thing I do think we should point out on this,
Yeah.
so for a good chunk of the of part one of this pilot, the main characters, most of the main characters can't communicate with each other. They don't have the ability to translate their languages until they get to the protostar, until they find that little communicator translator device. Then they can start talking and understanding each other. But that really throws, a rock in between. No pun intended, because there's all these rocks in around this here. But
Mm.
but it really throws a wrench into any plans they could have making because they can't really communicate. And I remember there's a scene where Dahl's trying to communicate with Rock Talk and trying to draw a picture on the ground, like, "Yeah, you come with me, spaceship," and trying to communicate through images and pictures rather than language.
Oh, that's right. That was pretty funny. The picture.
Yeah,
You come with me, and if you help me, I'll be able to escape.
yeah,
And then he goes, "Oh, and you can escape too." And he draws the picture of Rock
yeah,
Talk on that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that
Uh,
was good.
yeah, but you're right that when they find the communicator, when they get to the ship, that is definitely a connection to the more classic Star Trek because
Yeah.
that's how that is the explanation of like why everyone's able to communicate with each other and speak the common language. So them kind of referencing this in Prodigy was a good idea.
It is. And we also meet another character towards the end of part one that they colloquially describe as a colorful gelatinous life form
Oh
named
yeah,
Murph. I actually enjoyed Murph. I really did. I thought Murph was funny, kind of cute, and the the vocalizations, there wasn't a language to that. It was just this kind of these noises, but I thought that was kind of funny. And actually later in part two, Murph makes a pretty significant contribution, landing on one of the panels and pushing the buttons to fire the phasers to blow the debris out of the way.
yeah. He's the one that's
So
actually able to activate the phasers, which was good.
exactly, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, the crystals, I guess they were called chimerium
Mm.
or something
Yeah.
like that, which is those crystals that they find that are really, really valuable for some reason.
Yeah.
So that was interesting too.
Yeah. It was. Um, a lot of action on top of the ship too, as they're trying to figure out how to restore the shields. So that felt very Star Wars to me, that whole
Yes.
thing. So
That
uh
whole sequence and fighting and him fighting General Grievous, I mean,
yeah,
Dreadnought on the top of the ship.
it was
Um,
General Grievous. Yep, it
yeah,
was.
it really was. I mean, because he has like a cloak, and when the cloak comes off, all these things come out, and I'm like,
Yeah.
man, they couldn't have been more original with the design of this thing. I mean, it's like they just watched Clone Wars, like, let's do that, you know?
Yeah.
I thought that was strange, and I don't know. Maybe it kind of to me felt a little bit lazy to design a character much like that. I mean, it's one thing to be influenced by something, but when something is so, it's like the great value brand of General Grievous. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
Kirkland signature brand from Costco of General Grievous, and it was, I don't know, it was a strange decision to me.
Yeah. I did feel like you could yeah, it was you could make a few subtle changes and then this would not be a Star Trek show at all. It could be something completely, it could be Star Wars with just like a few really subtle changes right there. And they could go a completely different direction.
And I'm trying to think too. I think there was a scene where the diviner mentions, oh, something about the Federation or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that's to me, that was the first moment where I'm like, oh, okay, if they didn't have the opening Star Trek Prodigy thing in the beginning and nothing else, I wouldn't have known it was Star Trek.
Yeah.
Right? So you have that opening that says Star Trek Prodigy. Okay, got it, Star Trek. But then you watch through it and you're like, well, there's nothing in here that tells me this is really Star Trek, other than maybe a reference to, the Kazon and stuff like that. And then you get to this thing where he mentions the Federation. You're like, oh, okay. And then you see that they find the ship or something like that. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And now I'm thinking through this a little bit, but this might be in a way it's good that the perspective from the main characters, they are outsiders, so they're not Starfleet officers
yeah.
at all. They're just completely separate outside of Starfleet, outside of the Federation. Um, So it's from their perspective, and that's what we're seeing through this whole time. So they are discovering what this whole thing of the Federation and what a Federation starship like is. So that is a different angle,
Right.
which is good.
And I'm okay with
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's like watching Star Wars and watching something that isn't just based around the Jedi,
Hmm.
right? Because like, oh, it's Star Wars, so therefore the focus has to be the Jedi. That's how it's typically been through most Star Wars. And then they started introducing stuff like The Mandalorian and Solo and stuff that are focused on things that other things that happen in the galaxy. I'm okay with them introducing something like this. That's not I don't have an issue with that at all. But you're like, okay, give me something that tells me I'm watching Star Trek versus watching an episode of the Clone Wars or something like that.
Yeah, and in that case, I think there was very little. You said this was 2021-ish?
I want to say it came out in 2021. I'd have to look, but I'm pretty
Okay.
sure it was 2021.
And this was as far as Star Wars,
Yeah,
there
October
were like
28th, 2021 was when
2021.
Prodigy first came out. Yeah.
Okay. There were a lot of other different Star Wars animated shows that had come out too. Maybe Star Wars Rebels had already
Yeah,
been
Rebels I think was
airing.
already out.
Yeah.
Rebels had already come out. I don't know if it had finished yet. I'm trying to
Mhm.
remember if they had finished Clone Wars with the season 7, the last season.
Mhm.
I don't remember the dates on that, but
Yeah.
it's very possible that there was some significant influence from shows like that to make this show happen.
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree with you as well. Um, I actually so there was two characters I found myself really enjoying. Murph, yes, but the two characters that really kind of drew me in and I became fascinated with them, whether it was just from the humor or whatever, was the Jankum Pog. Didn't look like a Tellarite, but I actually enjoyed the character. Very
Mhm.
funny and sarcastic, but obviously a heck of a good engineer. And then Rock Talk. I actually really liked Rock Talk. And then you go from this like this like grunting kind of stuff to all of a sudden it's this like young girl voice. Like, and even Doll's like, oh, you're young or you're a child or whatever, right? Which was a very much a surprise. So I really enjoyed those two characters. I think the most in this two-part episode.
Yeah, I got it. I liked all the characters. I do find that like overall, on at least these first two, that it felt like the characters felt like generic.
Yeah.
Um, but if if I was watching this with um young child or an older child, I could definitely enjoy the viewing with them and like hopefully like kids are really liking this, so um for them to go through the crafting and creation of this series and all of the production value that has gone into it. I am hoping that it has found like a youthful audience and that they're really liking it.
Yeah, and I'm sure you noticed this, but there was a significant amount of telepathy that went
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
So Gwen apparently had some telepathic abilities. The Diviner had some telepathic abilities. Dreadnought could apparently get some type of telepathic signals. Doll could apparently communicate something
Hmm.
telepathically. Prisoner Zero could kind of sort of get some telepathy.
Hmm.
I'm curious in your thoughts about that because I kind of felt like that was overdone a bit in order to fill in gaps in the story to be like, oh yeah, well they're not near each other. How are we going to make them communicate? They don't have like communicators and stuff. So, oh yeah, we'll just use telepathy. That seemed to me a little bit overused.
I feel like that it could have been it was like this replacement for the Force. Like, oh,
Yeah,
it's the telepathy is the Force. It was like the same thing. It's like,
yeah,
okay, instead of us calling it the Force, we're gonna call it like telepathy.
yep.
And I was waiting for someone to pull out a lightsaber at some point, like a lightsaber come out.
Well, they did have that giant laser gun thing that shot up and
Yeah,
blasted a bunch of rocks, so kind of, sort of close to that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Very, very close. Yeah. Um, I really though I will say I really enjoyed the design of the protostar. Very slick looking. It had a little bit of an Equinox feel in the
Hmm.
saucer section,
Hmm.
and a little bit of a Sovereign class in the engine and the lower part of the ship. I like the design. I thought it was a really good looking ship.
I agree on that. The protostar looks really nice. It makes I
Yeah.
want to go look and if they've got any three-dimensional like models that are available for us to take a look at. I want to go see if they have that available for the
Oh,
Protostar
Chris, they
models.
probably do. This is nerds we're talking about. Nerds have all this kind of stuff out there. So I'm
You're
sure
right.
there's something.
Yeah. Yeah.
See, what people don't realize, that kids these days don't realize, I'm gonna sound like an old man here, is the difficulty back in the day when we were using AOL dial-up and things like that, and trying to find this stuff online was next to impossible. So now you can just find something from your phone, download it to your phone, look at it, zoom in. You couldn't do any of that stuff. It's so much easier now to find a lot of these things we couldn't find back then.
Yeah, you're right. Which makes me think like when you go back and we didn't have such sophisticated or instantaneous or ubiquitous internet to get all this information. Back when we didn't have this, it was a quest, right? So we were going on a quest to find this information, and if you got it, it was quite the achievement. So
It's true.
I don't know how we replicate that now. Everything's just like so instantaneous and out there. We need more quests. How do
We do.
we do that?
We do because Dr. Google tends to do a lot of the work for us, right?
Yeah.
Um, I would say too, Chris, but before, even when the internet was first kind of coming around, right? And maybe
Hmm.
you had it in your house and you'd have to get on it and it would end up, it'd be dial up. So you'd have to actually use a phone line to get on the internet. And therefore, if you had a phone in the house, you didn't have multiple lines in your house, you couldn't talk on the phone while you're on the computer. And then you picked up the phone with the like 90-foot cord on it
Yeah.
on your house phone, you hear the noise in the line
The
because
modem.
someone's on the
Yeah.
computer. And my mom would yell at me, Zach, get off the computer. I need to use the phone. That's something you'll never hear these days. But even when that was first coming online, I don't know if you remember this. I remember very vividly. If you didn't have like some type of technical manual books or you didn't have a library near you to go find the things, you may not get it at all. And some part of
Yeah.
that quest was looking through books and trying to find like, hey, does your buddy have a tech manual? And I remember a couple friends of mine when I was growing up, they had a whole bunch of like the tech manuals for the Star Wars ships and everything. And we might be playing Star Wars role playing, the old West End Games
Yeah.
version, and be like, hey, look up, does anybody have a tech manual that can find this thingamajiggy, whatchamacallit, on the TIE fighter or whatever? And we'd have to go through the book and we'd have to dig and look for it. There was no control F to find something on a web page. There was none of that. Most of it was book research.
Absolutely. Like going on a quest to find all that and going to the library, the
Yes.
biblioteca, my friend.
Yeah. That was muy bueno back then.
Yeah, it was. And then having to look it up on the library like search computer and then having to go physically go and get the book and then it was treasure to get the information.
Yeah, or even worse, if you had like the long drawers and you had to thumb through all the little cards
Ah,
trying to find it,
yes.
and then yeah. So
Yeah.
those of you out there watching or listening who have no idea what we're talking about, just be thankful that you have the instantaneous gratification where you can just go Google something and you'll get 1,500 to 5 million answers. And, that's your quest, is going through and going like this on your phone to scroll up and find the link you're looking for. But
Mhm.
all
But
right,
if you,
well,
yeah,
yeah. It
it's
was
good.
interesting. It was, but I think some of that, when it came to that, find that information, majority of the fun was in the hunt or the quest. Once you got the
Absolutely.
information, it was cool, but it's like, it was more fun going and finding it.
Yeah,
Those
totally
days are
agree.
long gone, my
They're
friend, long
long.
gone. They
Yeah,
were
they're
those
gone.
those were the good old days, as they
They
say.
are. Hey, but at least
But
we have both skills right now. So if the AI like takes over and there's a wipeout of the internet and all the information, like we would still be able to use the physical library and do that. So we do have that
that's assuming that the
skill.
buildings in our city are still standing. But besides that, we're not climbing through rubble to get to the biblioteca to dust off a book that we're like, hey, I know the world's on fire, but hey, I found this tech manual, so we're good.
Indeed.
Okay. So one of the biggest, and I mean, I think we both knew this because we had seen ads and stuff for it, but had you not seen Prodigy ever and you went into it with no idea about anything of the show, one of the biggest surprises we see at the very end of it is when they're up in space in the protostar and all of a sudden hologram Janeway comes on.
Yeah.
And we learned before Prodigy came out, we learned and they had dropped that Kate Mulgrew was coming back to reprise her role as Janeway, voicing over in this new animated Star Trek series that was coming out. So that was spoiled that way, but we don't know when we get it, and we get this hologram Janeway version right at the very end of part two.
Yeah. That was a good way to bring back the character of Janeway. I think
Yeah.
felt very appropriate, especially like these youths on the ship, and Janeway is gonna be there, the hologram version of herself, to train these cadets, supposed cadets
Yeah.
that are on the ship. So,
And I think it's a good way to end part two and your
mhm.
pilot because it gives you a really good tease going into the next episode or having to wait for the next episode to come out or however. I don't remember if they released all the episodes for this first season all at once or if it came out each week. I don't remember how that came out on Paramount Plus back when in 2021.
Mm,
Or maybe it might have even been CBS All Access back when this came out in 2021
yeah,
before it changed to Paramount Plus. But that being said, it was an interesting way to do that. And so when someone said the word help, I think, and that's what makes hologram Janeway pop up. And also interesting too, at the end of this pilot in part two, you see that the diviner has gotten out or broken out or something out of this containment tank that he was in, and he's struggling outside of that. When he looks over at Dreadnought and says, he needs to get his ship back for him.
yeah.
And that also makes you question another cliffhanger, right? What's going on with the diviner? Why was he in the tank to begin with? Why is he struggling outside the tank? My initial thoughts were, oh, here we go. It's Palpatine again.
That's what I
From
was exactly
yeah,
thinking. Palpatine.
yes.
Just
It's like the
totally.
diviner's Palpatine. It's like they're
Yeah.
taking Star Wars and just throwing it into a Star Trek name. It's kind of how it felt.
Yeah. Exactly, my friend. That
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Yep. That's
Oh,
why they call me
oh.
Zach. But anyways,
Yeah.
or maybe it's on my birth certificate, but that's besides the point. But yeah, so overall, Chris, what are your thoughts of this two-part pilot, Lost and Found?
I trying to think about how I want to how I want to think about this. It is didn't I mean it this is for youth, so it's completely different demographic, right? It doesn't feel like, at least this two-part episode doesn't have the Star Trek feel like to it yet, which is okay. But I
Yeah.
think
And that might still come.
yeah, that might
Yeah.
still come. Um, taking it for what it is, for like a youth oriented kind of space fantasy action animated show. I thought it was really nice. I think the kids would like it. Now, also think that kids might completely get it confused with Star Wars. It's just whether if you see this, if you were to watch Prodigy and then you were to watch Star Wars like Rebels or Clone Wars like right after, I I can totally see like confusion and going back and forth on which is which. And maybe I'm not giving enough credit to like the audience or the kids. Maybe they'll be more discerning and it's just really obvious and easy for them to make a difference. But it's just so similar, like to me when I
Yeah.
think about that, you know?
And like I said, we don't know the minds of the creators, and I haven't watched any interviews or anything like that of
Mm.
them. But maybe that was intentional. Maybe that was a way of drawing the kids in, saying, "Hey, they're used to seeing a certain thing a certain way with the Star Wars animated series. How can we draw them in? Because we know Lower Decks is not targeted towards kids.
Hmm.
Yes, it's
Hmm.
it's animated, but it's very much an adult show. Uh, and so maybe this is their attempt to say, hey, let's play off of and kind of mold this show in the way in which Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau did with Clone Wars Rebel stuff and put it into a Star Trek setting, and maybe that will give it some life. We know that it was a bit of a struggle for Prodigy to get a season two.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Prodigy is done or if it's getting another season. I have to go back and read up online do my quest
Yeah.
to find that information. But I'm not sure if Prodigy got canceled after season two. I don't
Okay.
remember, but to me that would make sense
Yeah.
for them to do maybe something like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What are your overall thoughts, feelings on it thus far? Just being knowing that this is just you and I have only watched parts one and two, so
Yeah,
what's your gut feel?
yeah. I would say overall, it's definitely not really my thing.
Mhm.
Not because it's geared towards kids, because I could sit down and watch a kid show and enjoy it. I mean, it's not a young kid show, but just this morning when I got up, I was watching Saved by the Bell on TV. Like that, I grew up on that
There
show.
you
That was my
go.
show when I
Yeah.
was a kid, growing up. So I, you're right. Visually, the animation's really nice. There was a line I did like when Dahl mentions that when he looked up at the stars, that he viewed it as this window of dreams or something like
Ah,
that. I thought that was really cool for a character. As far as we know, he might have been on this prison colony for most of his entire life, if not all.
hmm
We just don't know, right? They may very much make it sound like he's never been anywhere. He's just kind
hmm
of looked up, but hasn't, he's had this dream or whatever. So I like the idea of the show. I do think it feels like a little bit too much of a copycat, like we've talked about, of like
hmm
Clone Wars and Rebels, like the Star Wars animated, universe. So, we'll rate all this at the end, like we've mentioned before, as we've gone through the Spotlight series. We'll rack and stack at the very end each of the series and how we would put them in order as
Yeah.
far as their pilots and stuff go. I like some of the characters, but it's just not really my show. Again, we've only watched this two-part pilot, so I'd probably have to watch some more. Maybe I will, like I did with Lower Decks. Maybe I'll watch the first season of Prodigy and then see where I'm at the end of the season. Because
Yeah.
I mean, this was a two-parter, so it was longer, but each part was only like 24 minutes, and each episode is about 20-ish minutes. So
Mhm.
it's very fitting of this era. Short, fast-paced action, a lot of camera change, angle changes, boom, 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 bam, done.
Yeah.
Very similar to Lower Decks, right? Like
Yeah.
fast, super fast-paced, a lot of action. Although I actually found Lower Decks to be a little bit faster paced even than this was.
Yeah, because Lower Decks is making, which makes sense. It's making a whole bunch of jokes,
Yeah.
and Lower Decks is more nuanced with several different subplots amongst the characters. I mean, not that Prodigy doesn't have subplots, it does, and each character has their own motivations. But Prodigy also needs to be more straightforward because if it's aimed at younger audiences, then you just
Yeah.
go straight forward. So, yeah.
This popped in my mind, and I want to get your thoughts on this really quick, Chris. So, of all of the quote unquote new Trek we've watched so far as part of this Spotlight series,
Mhm.
looking at the pilots, starting with Discovery, Lower Decks, Prodigy, we'll get into Strange New Worlds and Picard, although Picard is a little bit of a rehash of an old series, obviously. But so far, it really feels to me like each show, obviously being a product of its era, is really focused on fast pace, very fast, very boom, 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 boom. There's a lot of callbacks. I think Lower Decks has a lot more Easter eggs. Prodigy seemed to have more callbacks so
Mhm.
far. Again, it's only, two episodes.
Yeah.
But they're all shorter. They're all fast paced. And obviously, again, that's a product of the era, but compared to what we consider like the legacy Trek, I don't know if that's good or if that's bad or what.
I agree. I don't think it's good. I don't think it's good. Um, but I say these new ones, Discovery and Lower Decks, um, and Prodigy, they're at least from what we've seen, and granted, we haven't seen all of Discovery, not nearly all of it, but classic Star Trek contemplates kind of deep, meaningful issues
Yep.
which lends itself to not necessarily being like these quick cuts or fast paced um, formatting of a show. Right? But I mean, Discovery and Lower Decks and Prodigy, they can be because they're not contemplating or at least I haven't experienced that they may be contemplating some
Yeah.
kind of deep things.
And if you think through the legacy Star Trek shows, I felt like with each of the pilots that we've watched, so obviously TOS or Enterprise, each legacy Star Trek pilot kind of wrapped things up in the first episode, in the pilot episode, whether it was a two-parter or not, with kind of like a little bit of a nice bow on it. Whereas Discovery, Lower Decks, and Prodigy have all left us hanging.
Hmm.
Well, maybe not. No, that's not true. Lower Decks didn't do that. Lower Decks did kind of wrap a bow on their pilot. Although technically the first two episodes were kind of the pilot. We only watched the first one,
Hmm.
but that's okay. But like especially Discovery and Prodigy as well didn't wrap anything up. And we were with the new Trek, I really feel like we're just thrown into the story and we're expected to know all these characters and kind of understand everything that's going on right away. Versus, I feel like the other series, they start out where it's like they're introducing the characters, they're introducing a new ship or a station or something. They're getting everybody together and then they're going off on the adventure or solving the problem or whatever
Hmm.
it is of the episode. And I feel like some of this newer stuff is not doing that. It's a much different take on a pilot.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Prodigy actually, for me as a pilot, at the moment, I feel better than Discovery as a pilot because at
Not
least
saying much, Chris. That's not saying much.
yeah, because they get out of that prison colony. They escape the prison colony, and that's kind of like, oh, okay. Now they're going to go on an adventure. They have a ship, and they've got Janeway as their kind of mentor that's going to kind of lead them away. They've got Janeway as Obi-Wan, essentially. And so now they're going to have like fun and hijinks.
Oh,
Like
Chris, we're tempting fate here. We're gonna start some kind of nerd civil war by our comparisons, but that's okay.
yeah, yeah.
Nerd
Um,
civil wars aren't dangerous. They usually just involve people on keyboards typing on a forum and being mad about something. So it's fine. It's okay.
um, yeah. And Discovery, I'm trying to remember how it wrapped up with the Klingon thing. Yeah,
We had a
you
lot of
and me
thoughts.
and Jenny. Yeah, we all had a lot of thoughts on
Yeah.
Discovery. Just
It was
didn't look
spicy.
in there.
Spicy
Yeah.
conversation with the pilot of Discovery. But um yeah, so Star Trek Prodigy, the latest iteration, well, not latest, the latest in our Spotlight series of pilot
Hmm.
episodes, back to back animated series too, which is interesting. So Paramount, Viacom, all these people that are, CBS, all these people that own the rights to Star Trek, they decide to do an animated series geared towards adults and Lower Deck. And then
Yeah.
the next series, they makes another animated series, this one geared towards kids. So I really feel like they took a huge leap doing both of these series after everything they'd done that came before Lower Decks and Prodigy. It was a big, big gamble.
Yeah. And they're for me when I'm thinking about it, and they're kind of following this overall like market trend that is happening, like in and on the Disney service, like the Disney has the various very youth oriented animated series for Star Wars and Marvel. And then the more adult kind of series so that they can get as much of the demographic
Yeah.
as possible. And so I feel that for Star Trek, they're following that same like formula. Like, hey, what kind of show would we need to get this demographic? Get the youth demographic, get the senior demographic, get the middle demographic. What are they
Yep.
looking for? What's popular? Um, and so that makes complete sense from like a business perspective. Um, but from our perspective, as you and I as like discerning fans,
Yeah.
may not like we, you know, may not agree. We may not
Right.
like agree or
Yeah.
have that kind of taste.
And if we're going to be completely honest and transparent here, we must identify the elephant in the room here. And I think that is that for a long time, when it comes to reaching a really wide demographic and appealing to a massive audience, Star Trek has always chased Star Wars. Star Wars has always done such a good job of appealing to so many, a wide variety of
Hmm.
group of people, age range and everything, right?
Hmm.
Star Trek is a little I don't want to say niche, but it's a little bit of more of a narrow audience, at least from Legacy Trek, because it's kind of it's been more heady and it's more geared towards that idea of thinking and exploration and adventure, but
Hmm.
not nearly the kind of action-packed stuff that Star Wars is, because they are both very different franchises. No matter how much we want to compare them, and we've done that, they're very, very different. They're similar but different. I think there's more different than there is similarities in Star Trek and Star Wars. And so I think what you brought up now, Chris, is that Star Trek, the new stuff especially, I feel like has been chasing Star Wars and Marvel in the way in which they've been able to market and target so many different audiences through their content. And that's what I think Star Trek's been trying to do.
Yeah. And
So I'm glad you brought that
yeah,
up.
yeah. And doesn't necessarily have to do that, right?
Right.
But I but that's what they're wanting to do at the moment. So
And honestly, like, I know some people have said, "Well, all Trek is good Trek," and that's fine. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think you can be a fan of a franchise and be critical of certain elements of it. But what I do appreciate is the fact that they are trying to bring in new demographics into Star Trek in this case, right? Lower Decks, I think, brings in a different target audience, right? People who are fans of Rick and Morty and Family
mhm.
Guy and American Dad and all these other, adult cartoons. Prodigy is gearing towards a young audience. Star Trek really has, I don't think, has ever really targeted a young, like my kids' age audience. There are kids that are my kids' age that like Star Trek, but in general, like my kids don't like Star Trek at all. They have nothing to do with it, and that's fine. I didn't really have a lot to do with Star Trek either at their age. It was mostly Star Wars. So I can understand them wanting to reach out to different audiences, bring them in. I mean, as much as I bashed on the JJ movies, um, they brought in a whole group of new Star Trek fans. I've told that story before about being at the convention. I think it was 2009 in Vegas, and all those hands going up saying it was their first convention, and a majority of them saying they got into Star Trek because the JJ movies were their in. Like they watched those, they liked them, and so then they started watching other Trek. It could be the same way with some of the new Trek. Somebody watches this one of the new Star Trek series for the first time, and they're like, "This is good. I like it. I'm going to go back and watch some of the other stuff that they may have never touched had they not watched something new." So I very much appreciate the contributions that these new series, whether you like them or not, have brought to the franchise and the people they brought along with them.
Yeah, I made me think like what you've been talking about made me think about another perspective like as well. These contributions have been important, like because you
Yes.
definitely you want like to increase viewership, to increase the opportunity for people to appreciate the more serious, kind of artistic, and more mature versions of Star Trek that are out there.
Yeah.
But as I was thinking about it, and just thinking about like as an art form, and as a written kind of form of like watching this visual media and the storytelling, um, we have some very mature and significant Star Trek stories that are out there that both you and I very, very much appreciate and are grateful for. And I wonder if like having these other mediums,
Hmm.
these youth mediums, animated youth mediums, kind of and kind of the Rick and Morty kind of type where it's kind of
Yeah.
a funny animated medium, if it detracts or diminishes like from like these very other kind of significant important kind of stories that are out there, right? So you mentioned like the last battlefield, which is one of
Oh,
your
let
toss.
that be
Yeah.
your last
Let
battlefield
that
from
be your last
TOS.
battlefield, right?
Yes. Love
So
that episode.
so which is its own kind of it's a very important statement in this show, like in this forum.
especially given the era in
Yeah.
which it aired, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I think about these kind of things. Does it do all these other kind of formats and mediums of Star Trek that are out there, which for a business reason are very important and for a demographic reason are very important. Like, do they dilute or diminish, something that is like, let that be your last battlefield?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer, but
I've
so
struggled with that myself,
mm,
both not just with Star Trek, but Star Wars too. And we've had
hmm
this conversation. We had it really early on in our podcast, like within the first 5 or 6 episodes, I think, talking about whether Disney had ruined Star Wars, and that was before even a lot of these other series had come out, and whether or not they were diluting Star Wars with too much
hmm
content, right? This idea of a balance between too much content and not enough. You and I, we grew up on only the original trilogy. That was it. If you wanted anything else, Star Wars, you use your imagination or you read books, the expanded universe books.
hmm
Then George Lucas brought in the prequels, which a lot of people hated at the time. Some people liked them, and now they're like, hey, these are pretty good, especially compared to that new trilogy garbage. But I have struggled with that myself with a variety of franchises because I feel like Hollywood has run out of a lot of ideas, and so they're going back and they're trying to recapture the magic of older stuff and remake it or reboot it or add on or whatever, and it most of the time doesn't work because it's so
hmm
hard to capture the original feel and magic of that. And so people felt that way about TNG when it first came on compared to TOS. They felt that way about DS9, and it was the redheaded stepchild of Star Trek for a long time. They felt that way about Enterprise. They felt that way about Discovery. I mean, I think it's really kind of some generational basis. And what I love is that we can have a franchise like Star Wars or Star Trek or, fill in the blank. And if we're still, or Doctor Who, if we're still talking about it and we're still debating it and we're still enjoying it, that means that they're doing something right. That the franchise is continuing. It's still living on. It hasn't died off. And it's in mothballs somewhere in somebody's basement that nobody watches anymore. Right. So I think that's beneficial. I can appreciate what the expansion of the universe and the expansion of the storytelling they're doing in the Star Trek franchise without necessarily being in love with every series that's come out. The same way in which I'm that way with Star Wars. Now, there's been a couple of huge missteps with Star Wars. Book of Boba Fett, I think they completely ruined that character, and it was just like it was such a shame what they did to that character. You look purely at a storytelling perspective, I like the expansiveness of additional storytelling,
hmm
but that doesn't mean that they're not missteps. And
hmm
we shared our thoughts on Discovery, we shared our thoughts on Lower Decks, and now Prodigy, and we'll do that with Strange New Worlds and with Picard. But it's something I wrestle with consistently with things like Star Trek and Star Wars. The balance between too much and not enough.
Yeah. Nice.
So
Nice.
yeah. So we're curious on your thoughts, everybody. For those of you watching or listening all over the globe and the interwebs, please share your thoughts with us. Send us an email, the random redshirt podcast at gmail.com. You can find us on social media. Send us a message on Instagram or Facebook or a comment here on YouTube on the channel in the comment section, whichever you prefer. Let us know. What do you think? Have we gotten too much Star Trek now? Are they watering it down? Are these new shows ruining the franchise? I mean, let us know what you think because I'm curious. I think there's a lot of thoughts and they're all over the map from different fans on what they feel and how they appreciate these new series.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be interesting to hear what
Yeah,
other folks think.
absolutely. Anyways, all right, Chris. Well, this was fun. I, as always, enjoyed it, but it was
Was.
it was good to look at another series, in this case, an animated one, but this time one geared towards kids and how we view that compared to the other ones that have all pretty much been geared towards older people or adults.
Yep. Yep. Been most excellent, my friend. This is good. Looking forward to seeing the other kind of the pilots as we get to them as well.
Yeah, Strange New Worlds and Picard season one. Those will be excellent. We've talked about them in the past as a whole, but not individual episodes. So talking about the individual pilots is going to be great. And then, of course, we're going to roll into our Section 31 Spotlight series after that, which is going to be a blast because we get to go back to DS9. But we also get more Enterprise, which is awesome. And every time we've talked about Enterprise in the show, Chris, people have really, really enjoyed it, and it's got a lot of people buzzing when we do talk about Enterprise. So
I know. It's Enterprise is awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I got to reach back out to Dominic Keating because I think it's a must to get him on while we're talking about Section 31 because his character was such an integral part on continuing Section 31 within the franchise during Enterprise.
Yeah. Yeah. So that'll be good. It'd be wonderful to be able to have him if he's able to come on in the
Yeah.
future. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll reach out to him and see if we can make that schedule line up, given I know he's busy with the decon chamber and everything else. So, anyways, but yeah, as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching and listening. We very much appreciate it. You know, if you feel so inclined, go to Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, your podcast platform, whichever. Reach out to us, follow us there, like, subscribe, do all that fun jazz. We very much enjoy interacting with you all and enjoying and sharing this content that we love so much. It's great as always, Chris, and we look forward to more episodes here in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you, my friend.
For sure, for sure. So take care, everybody, and we'll catch you next time right here on the Random Redshirt Podcast.